Hey, if this hair doesn't scream 7 a.m. fatherhood to you, I don't know what to tell you, but this is going to be a good one. I wanted to return to kind of just the longer form Yapathon format because the last two videos I did, which were how many games it took me to get to Challenger for the first time, and what Riot should do about the queue times and dodging. I think that there were a lot of things that I left out, which resulted in those videos being 10 and 20 minutes long, which is not usually what I do. So obviously, I'm looking back and I'm thinking, wow, I could have included a lot more there. So I want to talk about two different things. The first thing I want to talk about is what I did at each rank to basically improve my game, and what my rank journey was like going from bronze to challenger, and kind of tying that into how many games it took as well. And then reconstruct that knowing what I know now, because obviously those wouldn't have been necessarily the same things that would have pushed me from tier to tier. What would I have focused on at each rank, or at each stage of your climb to get to the highest level as fast as possible? So we'll be doing that first because I think that that's more helpful to people and more people would be interested in that. And then at the end, I'm going to cover some things that I feel like I left out of the queue time and dodging video, some concerns that came up and stuff like that I think are important for me to talk about a little bit more. So if you're Riot, skip to the end of the video. But here's the thing. Okay, so in my rank journey, I started playing League in Season 2, like the end of Season 2 in normal games. And then I didn't get around to completing my ranked placements until like the middle of Season 3, like the summer of Season 3. And in the beginning, I had a very bad mentality when it came to trying different roles and different champions. So the first thing I would change, and I would recommend this to you if you're not too deep into your rank climb, but probably most people here are, if you're newer to the game or if you're lower rank, and so you haven't learned a ton and you have a lot of time left in your rank journey, left in your climb, you're towards the beginning, I would say absolutely be willing to try different roles and different champions more than I did in the beginning. But then as you get later into your rank journey, you should be less willing to do that. And so what I mean by that is I started playing originally my first couple of games, first couple of days and weeks of playing League, I refused to play any champion other than Ashe, solely because Ashe was the champion that you played during the tutorial. And the reason for that is because I wanted to be immediately as good as I could be to keep up with my friends and whatnot, but also just to be doing well and to be winning games and feeling good. I wanted to be the best that I could be immediately. And that meant sticking with what I was familiar with. And at that time, that meant to me, well, I've learned what Ashe does from the tutorial. It's the only thing they've taught me. So I'm just going to stick with Ashe. And that was a bad mindset to have only 3 hours into playing League or whatever it was. Because when you're first starting to play League, or again, even if you're like towards the beginning of your rank journey, if you haven't sunk 1,000+ hours into any one champion, you probably still are in a stage of your League journey where you can find a different champion or a different role that you may enjoy more than the one that you're currently playing. And at the end of the day, the only players, if you want to get good at the game, the only players who are going to make it all the way to a point where they're, whatever your goal is, whether your goal is just to get Diamond or whether your goal is to make it all the way to Challenger eventually, you're not going to get there if you don't enjoy doing what you're doing. And so you have to absolutely experiment and find a role in a champion that you really enjoy playing. And then further than that, I would say that we've seen recently, and I'll use Dantes and his 80 carry journey as an example. We've seen recently that it's important not just to enjoy some aspects of the role or the champion that you're playing, but to enjoy playing the champion kind of correctly. And what I mean by that, or the role, is that Dantes really enjoyed fighting all the time on 80 carry. And I think to a certain extent, because he's a high-ranked player, he thought that he'd be able to just fight all the time because he's mechanically better than the other players he's playing against, and that he would prevail, right? And get to at least Masters or something just based on mechanics alone. And to a certain extent, he was close, right? He made it to Diamond pretty much purely through mechanics, even though his decision making and way of playing bot lane was just bad. Essentially, what I'm getting at is that let's say that you enjoy AD carry because you enjoy auto attacking a lot, or you enjoy skirmishing 2v2. But it turns out that the higher rank you go on AD carry, the less you're allowed to auto attack because you need to be more careful with your positioning. You're not allowed to fight all of the time, etc. Like Dantes said, if you enjoy fighting over and over again all the time, AD carry just isn't the role for you. Well, maybe somebody who likes fighting all the time on AD carry champions, or somebody who likes auto attacking a lot is going to want to fight a lot and auto attack the enemy champions a lot. You may enjoy AD carry the way that you're playing it now at a low rank, but you may not enjoy playing AD carry as a role or even your champion at a high rank. But it's complicated, right? For example, I don't think that I play Braum the way Braum should be played or is meant to be played. Maybe should is the wrong word. But I don't think I play Braum the way Braum's supposed to be played. Braum is supposed to be a disengaged champion that waits for the enemy team to start fighting him and then uses his abilities to counter what the enemy team is trying to do and disengage and peel really well. And of course I do that sometimes, but I play a very aggressive style of Braum. I would say that I'm engaging on their bot lane by Wing forward to a minion much more than I disengage a fight in bot lane, even though that's my champion's identity. I switched from Leona to Braum with the kind of misguided understanding as a plat player that Braum was a modern version of Leona that had a little bit more flexibility in his gameplay and a little bit more like he could engage like a Leona with his W forward in lane, yet he had more defensive tools than a Leona did with his E and stuff like that, and his ult being bigger, let's say. Now, that was probably a flawed assumption, but what I'm getting at here is that, to summarize, when you first start playing the game, so if you're a new player or if you're not super far into your rank journey, maybe you're like gold or below, you haven't sunk more than 1,000 games into a single champion or anything yet, you're early enough even at that point in your rank journey where you can say, is this the champion and the role that I really enjoy playing the most? And then maybe I enjoy it the most now, but if my goal is to get to Diamond or my goal is to get to Masters, is this the role that I would enjoy playing the most in Diamond or Masters, or like long term? Maybe the playstyle is completely different in high elo, and you should actually watch a high elo VOD of your role, not just to learn from it, but to see whether you actually would enjoy playing the role at a high level the way that you kind of have to play it at a high level. And are you playing the champion the way that the champion functionally is meant to be played at a high level, or are you forcing a playstyle that just doesn't work, and that's going to stop your climb dead in its tracks because now you're really fighting yourself on what is fun and what is the best way to climb for you and your champion. So there would be nothing more painful than putting 3,000 games on a champion and realizing, well, I know what I need to do in order to play this champion well, and I don't want to do it because it'd be so boring and so unfun, I wouldn't even enjoy the game anymore. That would really suck. So if you can find the mix between both now, early on, that would be great. And then the third point about me and the way that I play Braum and my own unique play style on Braum is it does, just because the way that you see a good player playing your champion doesn't mean that that's the only way the champion can be played. There's plenty of people who are, inventing new strategies and play styles that do end up working. It's just that most of them will fail, right? Most of them won't work. Only some of them will work. So for example, maybe playing Braum aggressively happens to work, but playing Taric like that doesn't, or something like that. So that's something important to keep in mind. So that's number one, is in that beginning stage, when I first started spamming Ashe over and over again, I would have much more appreciated the game and found what I enjoy about the game better if instead of spamming Ashe, because that was the champion the tutorial presented me with, if I instead had played a bunch of different games in a bunch of different roles and found what I really enjoy the most. And who knows what I would have picked. I'm not even sure what I would have picked. Then I ended up, after I was done with that Ashe phase for a while, in very beginning of my leveling process. I don't remember what level I stopped playing Ashe, but maybe all the way until like level 10. Then I switched to playing top lane, and I played top lane all the way until I was level 30. So I mained top lane the entire time. I was playing the old Irelia, old Pantheon, and Jax and stuff like that, bruisers in top lane. And when I got to level 30, I had a change of heart and decided that my friend group didn't have anybody who played support. We were going to start to play like ranked fives together and stuff like that. We were going to be duoing and playing solo queue and stuff. And I mostly switched to support, not because I was necessarily drawn to the role, but just because in my friend group, we didn't have anyone doing that. We had multiple people playing top, and I wasn't all that great at top anyways, especially compared to like other people who were playing top. So I was just thinking like playing support is a great way to duo with my friend who plays AD carry. It's what the group needs in order for us to be able to play as a team. So I switched to support, and then I decided that I would play 100 extra normal games after getting to level 30 to kind of learn support more before I went into ranked. But that was kind of, so then I switched to support. I think that there's kind of two problems here. One, I wasn't experimenting enough in those early stages, appreciating how little it mattered that I was switching back and forth. I could have switched more and experienced more AD carry, mid, jungle, different things to see what I actually really like, since I was going to commit to it for a long time. On the other hand, though, if I was just trying to get good as fast as possible, switching like that is terrible. So it's a difficult choice, but you have to balance out, when should I be done switching and experimenting with different champions, and experimenting with different roles. So you have to find that own balance for you, depending on what your ranked goal is. If your goal is to just have fun and you don't care about hitting diamond or above, or whatever rank, it could even be gold or platinum or whatever. But if you don't care about hitting a certain rank and you're just playing the game for fun, even if you enjoy ranked more because it's competitive, but you don't have a particular goal in mind, then sure, you just play, you can experiment with different things. If maybe one day you feel more like playing AD carry, another day you feel more like playing top. I feel like that some days, which is why I have an account for AD carry, an account for top lane, etc., that I'll go play a game on every now and again if I feel, an itch to play a certain champion in a different role. But, or, you can do that, of course, in normal games if you don't have 5 accounts. But I guess what I'm saying is that there's a certain point in your journey where you have to lock in and say, okay, if my goal is to get to a certain rank, I can't keep switching roles and champions anymore. But in the beginning, or while you're low rank or new, you want to do that a lot. Another kind of contradiction like that you have to find kind of a stopping point for is really gets into what I think my learning process is. And it's not really just at one rank, but honestly, all the way from the time I was bronze to the first time that I hit diamond, which I think we said in the video took me about, let me see, it took 2,428 games for me to get solo queue games on support, for me to get from bronze to diamond for the first time. And there's a bunch of things I want to talk about that number that I didn't get into in the previous video, which is why I wanted to expand on it. But the first thing that I'll say is I think that I didn't really have much of a learning process when I was going from bronze to diamond for the first time. I really do think that for the most part, I was just playing a feelings-based version of League where I would go into game and I would cast my abilities if it felt right and not cast my abilities if it felt wrong. And, somebody did something that I felt like was not allowed, I would try to, hit them for it, punish them for it. And if they did something that I felt like was allowed, then I'd give a little ground and back up. And what this led to was a lot of fighting, right? A lot of skirmishing, because I had no idea. It's like you're like a toddler, like testing boundaries of what is okay and what is not okay with your parents. You're just limit testing. You're testing everything, right? And I think that is a really good way to build up a solid foundation on how to play the game and game champion mastery, is to just be aggressive. Essentially, what you should be asking yourself is, do I know whether I win this 1v1 or this 2v2? And if the answer is yes, then you're going to take the fight because you know that you win. If the answer is no, I don't know whether I win or lose, then you're going to take the fight because you need to find out whether you win or lose there. And if the answer is no, I don't win here, then you're not going to take the fight because you lose there. So what happens is that your knowledge pool in different situations falls into three buckets. It's like, okay, I know that I'm going to win this fight, so I'm going to go for it. And when you're first starting out, that's a very small bucket. Then you have this gigantic bucket in the middle of like 95% of situations I have no idea whether I win or lose. Well, you have to fight all of those to know the answer to your question. Then you've got the last bucket, right, of, well, I think I lose this fight. So you're not going to fight in that situation. Not just that you think you're going to lose, you know that you lose in that situation. One of the difficulties for new players is that they think that they win fights that they don't. They think that they lose fights that they actually win. And in the middle, they have all this ground where they don't know, and you can fall into two camps. When you don't know, you can either go for it and learn, or you can just say, well, I don't know if I win, so I'm not going to risk playing aggressive here. Players that never play aggressive and answer those questions, that never limit tests like that, will never get better at the game because they're going to constantly live with this bucket of 90% of situations where they have no idea what happens. And how can you make decisions and play the game and get leads and punish mistakes and operate when you're working with 90% of the time, I don't know whether I win or lose? So even if it means that half of those 90% of times, 45% of the time you go in and you win, 45% of the time you go in and you lose, well, that's going to lose you a lot of games going for a lot of, kind of 50-50 flips on whether you're going to win or lose because you don't know any better. Or maybe you do win, but you execute it wrong or whatever. But if you don't play aggressively in those situations and you just play safe in 95% of situations because you don't know whether you win or lose, you'll never answer those questions and you'll never get better. So those players are going to be severely hard stuck because they're not playing aggressively enough to learn. So I would recommend that you play very aggressively when you're lower rank and learning the game or newer to the game. But then as your percentages in these different buckets change, now you change the way that you're playing the game. So let's say no longer is the unknown category 95% of situations. Now there's only like 10% of situations where you don't think you know what will happen. So you get it down after fighting a bunch and limit testing and all kinds of different situations from ahead, from behind, all kinds of different situations. Up levels, down levels, no mana, with mana, no HP, with a lot of HP. Every different thing with this summoner spell up and that one down, and you limit test a lot, and now you're down to, okay, I have enough champion mastery to know what happens in 90% of scenarios. Well, now what you're doing is saying, I know in most situations whether I win or lose. So now my decision making shouldn't just be based on going in when I win or lose, or, well, what do I do about the 10% unknown? You're going to experience very marginal gains in how much better you're getting at the game if you're going in that 10% of unknown scenarios when you already have a pretty full knowledge of the champion for the most part, and you would be better off going in and risking your game and risking your lane on fights where you know that you win because of the champion mastery that you've built up. So you're going to play aggressively in those situations where you know that you win, and you're actually going to actively start doing the opposite, which is avoiding the situations where you don't know, because they're few and far enough in between that they're probably not going to make a big difference to you as a player in terms of improvement from learning from them. And you don't want to throw those games and flip those games over plays that you're not sure about. So when things get really dicey, when things are looking really 50-50, when you don't know, you stop flipping those plays because you're no longer in a learning mode and a training mode, and you're in an execute on very clearly good plays mode. So this could happen to people probably at different ranks, but for me, really, it came down to when I got to Diamond for the first time, I got really hard stuck for a long time. So Bronze to Diamond, I was going up about a rank a year. Everything was a slow but nice progression upwards, and then I got stuck in Diamond. What really needed to change, well, a lot of things changed, but one of the things that really needed to change when I hit Diamond was I needed to be taking less fights just all the time randomly, or 50-50 fights, and I needed to be taking more guaranteed plays because I already knew enough about my champion in the game to pick good fights. It's just that I was still in this mode of learning and fighting all the time in order to buff up my mechanics, but my mechanics and my knowledge of when I won and lost was already so high, already at 90-95%, that I wasn't squeaking out very much progress or learning from that extra 5 or 10% I was working on. Instead, I needed to be more intentional and careful about the decisions that I chose to throw the game over, or like flip the game over. This includes not just focusing on your matchup anymore or your lane, but also keeping track of where the other players on the enemy team are that could come influence your fight. So I would again say that a huge part of playing League of Legends is like keeping track of the enemy jungler so that you don't find yourself in outnumbered situations. Or you could say, even regardless of the jungler, in general, League at a fundamental level on a macro scale is just about keeping track of where everyone is so that you don't die. We have 3 people here, they have 4. They have these 2 people missing that could show up to my fight right now, so I'm not going to go for it, even though I know I win. That is how you play League at a macro level, at a high level. It's really that simple. It's just a counting game. So what I'm getting at here is that once you get to a certain level of knowledge and skill with a champion, the game becomes much more about keeping track of where people are. And so there are even going to be situations once you get to that point where you're flipping a switch and you're saying, I know that I win this fight, but I'm not even going to take it because I don't know where the enemy jungler is. He could be bot, he could be top, so I'm just not going to fight at all, even though their bot lane's walking up and killing themselves. I'm not going to fight them at all over it, because the 30% of time or 50% of time that their jungler is here when they walk up like that, I'm going to flip the game. Whereas if I wait for them to make that same dumb mistake when their jungler is showing top, I'm going to punish it consistently every single time without ever falling behind. So now I'm going to get a lead in 90% of my games instead of getting a lead 50% of my games and being behind 50% of my games. What I'm getting at here is that when you're learning and when you're building up that bucket of 95%, I don't know what's going to happen, ignore paying attention to where the enemy jungler is. Don't work on your mini-map awareness when you're in bronze. Because frankly, even though that's an important part of the game at a high level, it's not an important part of the game when you're in bronze. Because you don't have the champion mechanics to care enough about where the enemy jungler is, because you just need to be practicing fighting all the time and learning your champion and learning when you win and don't win. So if you always respected where the enemy jungler was when you're in bronze, you'd be fighting like a third of the time or a fourth of the time that you normally would. Well, that's going to mean that your mechanics and your knowledge of, in my lane, I win or lose this fight 2v2 or 1v1, that knowledge is going to accumulate 4 times as slow as someone who just doesn't care about where the enemy jungler is and is fighting all the time. So I would actually say another weird thing about learning ranked or learning League is that when you're low rank, don't care about where the enemy jungler is. Don't care about where the enemy mid laner is. Fight, 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 fight. Then when you know what's going on with your champion, with your matchup, when you win and when you lose, then start turning on the switch and saying, okay, I care where the enemy jungler is. I never fight unless I know where the enemy jungler is. I never fight unless I know that this is a pure 1v1, right? I don't fight this, if my jungler is 30 seconds away from coming to gank my lane. I pay attention to where my jungler is. I pay attention to whether we know or don't know where their jungler is. And if we don't know, I always assume he's there, right? You flip that switch and now all of a sudden you're still able to get large leads and play aggressive enough sometimes throughout your game that you're going to get a couple of kills every lane because you're dominating your lane, because you know your champion really well. But you're doing it safely and consistently enough that you're never opening yourself up to losing. And that is how you start to play League at a higher level. So you have all these contradictions, right, that are going on, you should probably notice, about how the learning process for learning League and learning ranked is completely different than what makes you good at the game. This is something that I've learned, I'll give another analogy, that I learned really clearly with PUBG. Because I got to top 200 in PUBG in NA, and I'm terrible at PUBG. The reason for that is because PUBG has this weird system. I've talked about this before, where in a battle royale game where 100 people come down, it's like Fortnite for, the Zoomers who don't somehow know what PUBG is. You got a battle royale game. So you got 100 people, you're trying to survive the longest as possible. Well, people go into the games like that with completely different intentions, even when it's ranked. So if your goal is to rank up, then you will realize that placement is much more important than getting a kill. And you know that if you're an average skilled player, that you have a 50% chance of getting a kill and a 50% chance of dying. So why would you ever go for a kill or a gunfight with somebody when there's 90 people left alive, when you're flipping a 50% chance of being eliminated in like 90th place? The strategy for ranked in that game is to avoid contact with people and to avoid fighting with people. But in this weird situation, if you avoid fighting with people all the time, you'll never eclipse a certain skill, because if you never fight people, when you make it to the top 10 every game, when you make it to the top 20 every game, just from not fighting people and running around and surviving, you don't have the mechanics with the gunplay to be able to actually kill anyone and win the game. So you're permanently second place, and that feels pretty bad, although it's a viable strategy for climbing ranked. So in PUBG, I realized that this was the way to play the game very early on in that game, and so I just avoided contact with people, and I was able to make it to the top 200, and I had it even worse than average, even way worse than average. I had a 0.33 KD. Now, part of that was because of my playstyle. I wasn't even trying to contest loot. Like, I wasn't even going for guns because it was a risk to land at a place where there was loot and get almost anything. So I would land at a shack and get, maybe a shotgun or something like that. And then I'd get in a boat and drive out into the middle of the ocean until I couldn't anymore. So that's a bit of a tangent, but it's the same concept. What makes you good at that game, in terms of like mechanically being good, like if you wanted to be the best PUBG player in the world, you would have to have spent years practicing fighting people nonstop so that you're mechanically good enough with the guns that you always win the final round, because you're not an average player. You're like going to have a 90% chance of beating some random player 1v1. But also play the game with the strategy of playing passively and not engaging and fighting people. And you find the balance between those two, and you become the best player in the world. But to get there is two very different paths, because what teaches you to play very well with your aim and stuff like that is playing very aggressively, which is the opposite of the strategy that you need to use in order to be good at the game. So it's this weird catch-22, or like, and the same thing exists with multiple things in League. In the beginning, you should try many different champions and roles to find what fits the best with you, what you're the best at, and what you're going to enjoy playing long term. Otherwise, you will just never play enough League to be good at it. But at the same time, if you stick to one champion in one role, you'll get better faster. So what do? It's up to you. I would start by experimenting with a bunch of stuff and then stick to one thing. But you can do either or whatever you want, whatever floats your boat. I'm just telling you how it works. Then you have stuff like, well, if I want to learn how to play well mechanically and what matchups I win and what matchups I lose, and, to be a good player, to be able to punish people's mistakes and know what I can and can't do, I've got to play really aggressively and coin flip a lot of games and kill myself a lot of times. But that's not going to be conducive to you immediately climbing and finding success. That's going to be a very long-term view of getting better at the game. So in the short term, you're going to lose a lot of ranked games where if you had just done nothing and learned nothing, you might have won that game, but you wouldn't have been any better as a player, and so you'd be stuck. And once you hit your peak, you won't go up any higher. So, the long-term game is to play very aggressively, but the short-term game is actually to play very passively. Then you get finally higher up in rank, and or you've built that knowledge already on your champion, and now you can start to play a little bit more conservatively, knowing what matchups you win and what matchups you lose in what situations. A lot of things like that, right? With League. So I think that my process from getting all the way from bronze to diamond was purely matchup based fighting mechanics. we'll get into, how I would go about maybe doing some of those things differently. We've sort of talked about some of those things. But now let's talk about what I did to go from being stuck in diamond. I was back and forth demoting between diamond and plat. One season, I demoted from diamond 5 at the time to platinum 1, which was hard to do, by the way. It took a lot of games to do that. I demoted 7 times back and forth between platinum 1 and diamond 5. It was like the most I had ever heard of. It was just a disaster. And as crazy as it sounds, a lot of things changed. I think the biggest thing that changed for me going from diamond to masters was unlocking my camera. And I don't talk about that enough because I think a lot of people have already unlocked their camera, or that they ignore that because it's like, okay, well, this doesn't apply to me. But I'll say a couple of things about this. So number one, if you're playing on lock screen, you can't do that. You simply can't see what's going on in the game. You need information about who's approaching you. You need to be able to position in the lane. Like, you've probably noticed this if you play on lock screen, especially in like bot lane or top lane. You move your camera by moving your champion, right? To keep the enemy in frame and things like that. So what you do is you misposition constantly in lane because you're playing on lock screen so that you can see what's going on. But a lot of times you need to be able to position in bot lane. It's so freeing when you learn how to play off of lock screen, because now all of a sudden I don't have to play up against the wall on the bot side of the lane every single time. Now I can play away from the opponent who's sitting in the bush trying to cheese me. Now I can just play near the river. I can play whatever side of the lane I want. Maybe I need to be playing that side of the lane because of where their support's positioning. So you're positioning. I'm so confused. I thought I heard the baby, but isn't the baby gone right now? But anyways, we might be losing it here. It is early. But so your positioning is dictated by your camera being locked. And so you can change your positioning in lane and stop griefing your positioning in lane by unlocking your camera. Not only that, but the information that you're gathering in skirmishes and team fights and stuff like that is really important, because you miss out on not just what abilities are being used, but what threats are coming into your team and stuff like that, how you should position in team fights, whether you should hold one of your abilities for somebody who's coming into the fight or something like that. If, even I saw like where your teammates are positioned, how close they are to catching up to you, what their intent is based on the way that they're walking. Are they looking like they're walking away from the fight and they want you to disengage, or are they looking like they're committed with you? Because you'll run into a lot of situations where you think, oh, we should still be fighting this, and you'll commit to the fight, and you didn't see the body language of your teammate, and so you don't know that they're actually trying to leave, and you would have known that if you're playing off of lock screen. This is the other big thing, is that for me, I had played so many games by the time I went off of lock screen. I think we looked at it and it was like, I played 11,000 ranked games on support. I think still to this day, roughly speaking, I played 6,000 of those 11,000 on lock screen and 5,000 off of lock screen. So I've finally gotten to a point where I'm almost at the same number of games, off of lock screen as on lock screen. And the thing that's crazy about it is that what I was talking about in that last video, but I'll mention it again because I think it's really important. When you're learning League over that many number of games, you're drawing a lot of patterns and like taking in all this information about a situation. So maybe this situation, this skirmish, we won, but we won because of some guy over here in the corner doing X, Y, and Z. And you could have 2 skirmishes that look exactly the same on lock screen, and one you win and one you lose, and you don't know why you won or lost each fight. But playing on unlock screen, you can see, okay, this happened with this person over here, and that's why we won this same scenario in this situation, and this is why we lost in this situation. And you're able to gather more information, so you're able to make your patterns, you're able to formulate your patterns that you're seeing in the game better and more complete because it's based off of more full information. So spending thousands of hours drawing patterns off of incomplete information when you could have access to more information is just stupid. It's just plain old stupid. And then here's this important thing. I probably should have led with this because people gloss over this if they're most people don't play on lock screen or know obviously they shouldn't. Even once you play off of lock screen, that's not the end of this like journey with camera control. Camera control is as important and as hard as playing your champion, maybe more important, because I see a lot of players that play off of lock screen that have bad camera control. So there's a lot of players in bronze, silver, gold who played on unlocked camera, but the way that they were moving their camera around and what they're seeing with their camera is less than someone who's diamond who is playing on lock screen. So we have to understand is your journey with, let's call it camera control rather than unlocked or locked screen. Your journey doesn't end with unlocking your camera and getting comfortable moving your camera around with your mouse. You can always be improving it. The less you have to move your camera around, let's say in lane, the more you can use your cursor to actually do things that you want to do in the lane. So if you're constantly having to bump your camera around every 1 or 2 seconds in lane, you're not doing it right. You're not framing your lane well enough. You need to get to a good spot that you can sit in for a little while. And then, of course, you want to adjust it. And if you're adjusting it too slow, you're also doing it wrong. You want all the relevant information on screen. So if you're playing bot lane, you want all 4 champions on screen, right, at the same time, if possible. And you also want to get there in the most efficient way possible, which means you want to pick a position that has all 4 people in frame, but you have to adjust it the least amount as possible so that you're able to move your mouse for other actions and movement and stuff like that without constantly pulling your mouse too far away from your champion at the edge of the screen. So there's an art to it. Also, right, in fights where things get really messy and there's people approaching from 3 different angles and stuff like that, it's not easy, even for people who are pretty good with their camera control, it's not easy for them to gather all of the relevant information. So just because you play off of locked camera, or you're a player who stopped playing on locked camera and now you're a bit comfortable with it, or you're thinking about playing off of locked camera and, after 50 or 100 games you get comfortable with it, it's not just being comfortable with it, it's that you constantly can get better at the information intake that you're doing. What I found for me was that because I had been stuck in diamond for like low diamond, high plat for years, I was good enough at the game, at my champion, at all this stuff, that once I unlocked my camera, I instantly got a lot better at the game because my decision making, my knowledge base was already good enough that with better information, my decision making was just good enough to get much higher, get all the way to masters after I've been stuck in diamond for forever. It was instantly good enough to get to masters because now all of a sudden, if I had known, oh, this guy's doing this over here off of my screen, my decision making gets so much better off of that it instantly shot me up from being stuck in diamond for years to masters. Now, there were other things that improved and changed at the same time, like I mentioned before. For one, my ping over the years really changed a lot, and it corresponds as well. So when I was in Seattle, when the server was in California, my ping was about 20 or 20 somethings for the entire time I went from bronze to diamond for the first time. Then when I got stuck in diamond/platinum, it happened to coincide with when they moved the server to Chicago, and now I was playing on 60 ping. So some people might say that the reason that I was improving, but that because my ping had gone up so much, rather than going, continuing from diamond to masters the next year, like I had been with all the other ranks all the previous years, the huge spike in ping made me so much worse of a player that just staying even was actually improvement, and I was improving, and I wasn't slowing down my rate of improvement. It's just that the ping was a huge problem. And that's probably the case to a certain extent, but unlocking my camera seemed to help a lot more than that. Then when I moved to the Midwest for college, my ping went down to to like 13 or something like that. And that's when I suddenly, after having spent years in like high plat, low diamond, all of a sudden shot up to masters at the same time. But I was also making a very conscious effort to improve and to play. And I think it is worth noting, even though I wasn't playing a ton of League at the time, that my ping actually went down the year before. It went down my junior year of college, and I was still stuck between plat and diamond. And it was in my senior year of college, so like a year and a half or a year after playing with 13 ping, that I was still at the same rank. And then I got sick of being stuck in a low rank. I was like plat 4. I had like switched to playing like Lee Sin mid at the time, just doing some random stuff, not for very many games, but for like 5 games, I was basically just tilt queuing random champions and roles and stuff for fun. And I hit this point where I was at a really rock bottom, where I'd gone all the way from diamond to like platinum 4 again. And I was like, I'm just sick of this. And so I started making a lot of improvements at the same time. So the ping certainly helped, but it is worth noting, to be fair, that the ping was low for a year leading up to that. So I was hard stuck for a year, even with the ping being lower. But I think with all those improvements at the same time as the ping getting a lot better or being a lot better, that definitely helped. So ping was really important. The unlocking my camera was really important because I already had the information base in order to base my decisions off of. I just needed to collect information better. So once I started seeing what was happening better because I unlocked my camera, and every year since then, even now, I still have situations where my camera control isn't good enough and I could still be improving my camera control. I missed something, or I got lazy and I should have panned and seen something happening and I didn't, too slow or whatever. It's like there's still room for me to grow on that, and it's going to continue to make me a better player. So the camera thing was really important. And then I got really intentional, and this is a big one. Okay, I got really intentional with how I was using my abilities. So we talked a lot about, for Braum, when you use Braum E, there are a lot of different ways that you can get baited into using Braum E. This happens with other champions too. I'll use Janna as an example as well. But let's say that like with Braum E, you can use it to block a spell that's going to damage you because it reduces 100% of the damage of the first thing that hits you. So if you're going to get hit with any spell, you could just throw up your E to not take any damage from it. But your E is a very long cooldown. It's like, it's near 20 seconds. It comes down as you put points into it and as you get ability haste. But it's a pretty long cooldown early on into the game. So putting your E on, 17, 18 second cooldown to block one spell that's going to do a little bit of damage to you isn't really worth it. You can also use your E on Braum to give yourself movement speed. It gives 10% movement speed. So sometimes you're going to use it like I use it every single time from base, like from fountain back to lane, because it makes me a little bit more efficient getting back to lane. Now that's fine, because if I'm running back to lane in the early game, my E is always going to be up by the time that I need to use it if I get back into lane. But let's say you're later into the game and you're using E to move towards a fight or something like that, that's really dangerous, because if you're not really careful with, how long it's going to take you to get there, if your E is on cooldown even for a couple of seconds when you first get to that fight, that may have been the time window when you needed to use it to enter that fight. And all of a sudden you've put that on cooldown and wasted a massive opportunity for a tiny amount of extra movement speed that's really not going to make a big difference at all to, 3 seconds of 10% movement speed is really small. It's probably going to make instead of being... I don't have a picture of the game to show you, but you're going to move like a couple of Teemos, in order to put it into perspective, right? A Teemo unit is, as we use for League, is 100. So you're going to move maybe 2 or 3 Teemos or something like that in my head. We can actually calculate it, and I'll tell you how many units you'll move. So if you have 3 seconds of 10% movement speed, let's say you have a lot of movement speed. Let's say you have 400 movement speed. You certainly have this if you had, You'd have close to this if you have tier 2 boots. I go swiftness boots, so I tend to have more. But let's say you have 400 movement speed. So 10% of 400 movement speed would be 40 movement speed. And movement speed is just units per second. And you get that for 3 seconds. So you get 40 extra units of movement for 3 seconds. So you get 120 units. So yeah, you would move 1 Teemo, 1.2 Teemos more forward. So if you think about that, that is almost never, 99.99% of the time, moving an extra Teemo closer to the fight is almost never going to put you just enough in Q range or something like that you can help out. Or you just barely get into locket range for somebody who's about to die and you can help out. 99.99% of the time it's not. But you know what's going to happen a lot more than 99.99% of the time? You're going to screw up your timing and your E's on cooldown when you enter the fight. So using Braum E to move towards the fight, pretty much always generally a bad idea. Unless you're very precise with the timing and you get away with it and it's up, you're going to have it on cooldown way more often than you would have it as a benefit to be 1 Teemo closer. So no good, right? So you get baited into using your abilities to do things that they're not really good at doing. It's kind of an interesting concept in League. Abilities often have like 3 or 4 different functions, and you have to understand what the most important function is. And if you think that, you're going to get a little bit of extra value by using the least important function on your ability, you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. And there are a lot of abilities that are basically what I would call noob traps because they bait people into doing the wrong thing. So like Braum E giving movement speed in the first place is a bait, right? Like it's honestly, Riot removing it from the game probably would have almost no impact on Braum, being good or bad. So his win rate would probably remain neutral if you took it away. Maybe it would go down a little bit. It's definitely nice, I guess, in that specific scenario to have the movement speed when you're using Braum E properly to stay in front of somebody to block for them or something like that. That can be kind of useful. But, it's the type of thing they could probably get rid of it and it would make very little impact on the champion. So I often wonder why they don't simplify the abilities, but it's kind of a cool art form that the game gives you a lot of ways to screw up your own kit, right? They bait you into 3 different things that you could use your ability for. They're all terrible, and here's the way you should actually use it. You have to figure that out in order to be good at your champion. So what I'm getting at here is that one of the other things that I did that really helped me improve was be very intentional with the way I was using my abilities. So understand not to use Braum E that way. But hey, if I'm coming out of base, first off, when you're coming out of base and you have home guard, you're going to actually get more movement speed from your E because maybe you have 500, 600, 700 movement speed coming out of base. So you are getting actually a lot more movement then. Maybe you're getting 200 or 300 units worth of movement speed out of it. And now that especially when that ability is going to be up for free no matter what, that's 1 second. Like if you have 400 movement speed and you get to move 400 units faster, that saves you an extra second in getting back to lane. So using that for free every time is totally fine. But, that you're going to min-max certain things in certain ways. So that you don't use Braum E to ever get to a fight faster, but that you can use Braum E for free at a base, unless they're like in your base or at your tier 2 turret or something like that. Then you need to not do that because they're too close. You'll arrive too quickly while your E is still on cooldown. So you learn things like that, right? But even further than that, and this is the main one, is patience and timing. So let's say you have an Ornn and a Braum. It's a good example, but I'll take this a step further than the example I always give, which is that what is optimal for the Braum to do? The Braum knows from loading screen, from champion select, that he's versus an Ornn, and that he can cancel Ornn ult by using his E backwards to disappear Ornn ult before the slow thing even hits his team. So if you know that you can eat Ornn ult with Braum E, there's a couple of things that have to happen there. First, you have to play a lot of League to know that that's the interaction and to do that. Braum E can stop Talia wall for example. the way that that works is like when the wall will still go, but when it bumps into Braum with his E up, even if she wanted the wall to go further, it'll just stop building the wall and then she'll hop off wherever Braum has stopped her. So there are interactions like that. You would have to play a lot of League to play enough games of Braum versus Talia and be intentional enough with experimenting with your abilities to even run into situations where you're using E versus Talia R as Braum, or using E versus the old. You have to be intentional to even learn that in the first place. So people think that when you first start playing League that you've got to learn what all the champions and items and stuff in the game do. But what they forget is that you also have to learn how all of the abilities and items and stuff interact with each other. And when you're just learning, okay, there's 170 champions and they've got 4 or 5 abilities each that I've got to remember. If you're slowly working on that and seeing them in game, eventually you're going to learn them for the most part, right? But the truth is that I don't even know all of them now, right? They change so frequently. Even though I read the patch notes and keep up, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, and especially in roles that are away from me. Every time I look at the patch notes for top lane, all this stuff about Kled that happened in the last patch notes we saw, I don't know what's going on with some of these top lane champions. You know, I was on stream the other, it was a while ago now, but I was on stream one time, and we were just going through top lane champions. We were going through Garen and Darius and stuff like that, and reading their abilities in Tryndamere. Because to be honest, I know what each ability does, but I don't know the specific details. So like I know, that Tryndamere ult makes him invulnerable, and then he, gains rage or something like that. He gains full rage. But do I know exactly what that means? Do I know how much crit he gets from it? Do I know how long his ult duration is at different points? If it even changes, I don't even know now. I don't. For Darius, I knew that, if he hits you 5 times or whatever, he gets his passive bleed stacked up all the way on you. And he gets a bunch of AD and true damage and all that stuff. But I didn't know that once he's stacked it all the way up on one person, that if he goes and hits any other champion with an ability or an auto attack, that he instantly applies 5 stacks to them as well. So that really changes my perspective, because now as a melee champion, as a Braum or something, I know that just because I'm getting hit with 5 stacks, I'm not only enabling him versus me, but I'm also enabling a Darius versus my teammates. So it's really extra important that I don't let him stack on me, because even if it's not threatening to me, it may be very threatening to my teammates, or it may enable him to get a flash Q that puts his passive onto a bunch of people on our team in a fight, and I wouldn't have known that before. But obviously you're going to know more about the champions you're laning against and that you're seeing more often and playing against and interacting with more often, and less about the champions on the other side of the map. So if you're a bot laner, you're going to know the least about top lane abilities. And if you're a top laner, you're probably going to know the least about support and AD carry abilities potentially. Although, luckily for top laners, AD carry champions tend to be pretty straightforward, unless it's Aphelios. Ask a top laner what Aphelios does. I bet they don't know that. I know what Aphelios does. I'm not going to get into all that, though. We'd be here for another hour. So what I'm saying is that people think that your League journey, when it comes to learning the abilities and stuff like that, it's like, oh, well, that's baby stuff. In bronze, silver, gold, whatever, I learned what all the champions' abilities do. But I'll tell you right now, I've hit Challenger, and there's a lot of abilities where, yes, I know Darius takes, or let's take Garen, for example. We all know that Garen's Q is he's going to, slice down on you with his Q, do a little bit extra damage, he gains some movement speed, blah, blah, blah. It's a silence. Is it a silence? It's a silence, right? Uh-oh. Used to be. Probably still is. His W nowadays gives him like a, shield. His E, he spins around, spin to win, does a bunch of damage. His ult, execute, does true damage to you, and is going to kill you when you're low, blah, blah, blah. We get that. But do you know the nuances, right? Like, do you know that Garen Q cleanses slows? Do you know that Garen W gives him tenacity, even after the shield has faded? It's just a duration that he's going to get some tenacity that's not the same as the shield duration, which I think is rather confusing, right? You might expect, even if you knew that the shield represents the time that he's getting the tenacity. It goes away. Okay, now time to CC him or something. That's not how it works. So there's a lot of little details that you may not know about champions. And sometimes those little details are worth playing around. Sometimes they're not worth playing around. You're going to play around the fact that Braum E gives him 10% movement speed. It's probably not going to change the way that you're playing Yasuo or something. But, there's a lot of little details people don't know no matter what rank they are. So you're always still learning what all the abilities are in the game, especially when they keep releasing new stuff and reworking all the abilities and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff like what they just did to Kled. I mean, maybe they would consider that a rework, but there's a lot of stuff that's in the patch notes that's not really a full-scale rework, or it doesn't get branded as a rework. I don't see like a new video on how the champion works or anything like that being posted by Riot. Yet it's basically a rework. Right, how much they've changed all of his abilities. So there's a lot of stuff that changes, and you miss one of those, and there's a whole champion you're just completely lost on how they actually work nowadays. So in that way it's harder. Oh, so two things about this. One, before I forget, because this actually should have been about the stuff, me going from bronze to diamond. Another thing besides the Smurfs, which I mentioned way earlier, that I think slows down your climb from bronze to diamond now, is that when I was learning the game from bronze to diamond, learning what the champions did was a smaller task because there were like 40, 50 champions when I started playing. So all of a sudden, when there's 40 champions to learn or 50 champions to learn, that's much more manageable. And you learn them much more by the time you've hit level 30 than you would nowadays. I also think, and I could be wrong about this, I'm not sure, and I'm not researching it, but I'm pretty sure it took longer for me to hit level 30 than it does for people nowadays. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It obviously still takes a long time to hit level 30, and it always feels like a grind compared to other games to unlock ranked in League, probably for the best. But I remember playing, and I know I played the 100 extra games. I feel like it must have taken me like 400 games to get to level 30. And there's just no way that it takes that many games to get to level 30. Like, win or lose, it just doesn't take that many games to get to level 30. Maybe I'm mistaken about how many games it took me. Minimum 200 or 300 games to get to level 30. All normal games to level 30. There's just no way. It doesn't take anywhere near that many to get to level 30. So basically, between those two things, I had a lot more time when I was in the normal game leveling up process than I think people spend today. And when you have less champions, not only are there less to learn, but if there's only 50 champions to choose from, you see a lot of repeats more frequently. So somebody today who plays, even if they did have to play the same number of games, let's say that they played like 200, 300 games to get to level 30. Well, if there's a champion that's only picked 1% of games, they're going to see that maybe 3 times in their normal game journey. That's probably not enough times, especially if they're not versus it directly, or let's say it's on their team or something like that. Probably not enough time to learn the champion. And there's going to be dozens of champions like that. Whereas in my journey, when there's 40, 50 champions, I'm going to see every champion in the game probably once a day if I'm playing 10 games a day or something like that. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but you get the point. Less champions to learn, and they were showing up more frequently in my game, so I was getting more reps versus them. So that makes learning the game a lot more difficult and means that it's going to take you a lot longer to learn the basics and the fundamentals. So if it took me 2,400 games, might take somebody else nowadays, when there's quadruple or whatever the number of champions, might take them even longer. And that's totally fine and totally understandable. Let's see. So where were we here? Oh, yeah. So you have to learn ability interactions after you learn what all of the abilities in the game do. So even once you've learned what all 170 champions do, you have to learn all the ability interactions. And it's not possible to learn them all. I've said this before, but if you've got 170 champions and you got 5 abilities each, including the passive, right? You've got 850 abilities to learn. But if you're trying to learn how all 850 abilities in the game interact with all other 850 abilities in the game, then you've got 722,000 ability interactions that you need to learn. And that is too many for one person to ever see in League of Legends or ever learn, possibly ever. So what that's going to mean is that it's impossible to completely master that level of knowledge on the game. But for your champion, if you're focused on 5 abilities times 850, this is why one-tricking can be so effective. Now we got 4,250 interactions to learn. Well, that one person can actually manage to do, because if I see a new ability interaction, just once per game on Braum, and a lot of them are mundane, right? A lot of them, even without seeing them, you would know how they work or whatever. But if on average I'm learning one, per game, and keeping in mind that just Braum queuing into a Caitlyn queue is one, right? If I see one interaction per game, not even a special interaction, just one regular interaction, new one per game, I've already played enough solo games on Braum to have seen every single one. So because of that, I'm going to know 95% of the ability interactions with Braum. And because of that, I'm going to be much, much more competent at the champion than somebody who doesn't know that. So what I'm getting at here is that to get to the next level, you need to not just be using Braum for things like the movement speed or to block a little bit of damage, but you're using Braum versus the Ornn ult, right, to completely negate his ult with one ability cast. And that means being very patient with holding your E, means knowing how the interaction works. But let's say you're the Ornn player as well. What's cool when you get to high elo is the game ups itself a little bit, because now the Ornn player knows that, and they're not just going to cast their ult while you're holding your E. So the natural state of things, the natural way that you would play the game if you have a Braum versus an Ornn, is for both players to hold both abilities for as long as possible. Basically that's the way you would go. And then if the Ornn's team kills the Braum first, now the Ornn is free to ult. Or if the Braum's team kills the Ornn first, then Braum is free to E. Maybe Braum sees an angle where, even though he knows Ornn ult is a possibility, he can get enough value out of using his E that he finds a different situation to use it in, and uses it early, and then Ornn uses his ult in response. Maybe Braum can even then go and counter Ornn again by saying, okay, I've used my E to make something productive happen or something important happen in this fight. Now Ornn is ulting in response. Now when Ornn goes to push his ult back into us to knock us all up, I'm going to hit Ornn with Braum ult so that he's knocked up at the same time he tries to use his ult. So now he's CC'd and can't batter his ram into us. And so now we've disabled Ornn ult. I mean, we still got slowed by it, but we disabled the knock up on Ornn ult with our ult. So you get this kind of high level mind game. This is the fighting game aspect of League, that you've got to be really capable of using your abilities well. I had a game yesterday on Nautilus where I saw a play on a Jarvan, and I'm not very good at Nautilus. I have a terrible win rate on the champion, but I'm experienced with him and I understand how his abilities work. So I had a situation where I saw an enemy Jarvan, and he was, we had people collapsing on him, but he was about to get away. And I flashed over a wall and Q'd him, and it canceled his EQ. So he wasn't able to EQ to get away. He didn't buffer it or anything. He didn't see it coming, obviously. I just timed my Q correctly so that it, it pulled him out of his EQ. Even little nuances like that, like, what I just mentioned about buffering it. There are probably, I'm not 100% sure, and I'm not as comfortable with Nautilus's interactions as I am with Braum. I'm pretty sure that if you sat a Jarvan and a Nautilus together in practice tool game, that there are certain timings where Jarvan could get pulled by Nautilus Q, but because he EQ'd, he'd end up at the end of his flag, he'd end up doing the flag and drag combo, And yes, he'd be stunned, but he'd be canceling the CC duration with his movement of going to his flag anyways, and he'd just be out. But there are other timings where Nautilus hooks the same Jarvan doing the same EQ combo, but because it's maybe earlier or later into the combo, he doesn't complete his EQ, and now Nautilus has pulled him in. Very nuanced details like that. And if you were a noob to Nautilus, you might see that interaction happen one time, and you might think, oh, well, you can't cancel Jarvan EQ with Nautilus Q. But it really depends, right? And so even with the same, we talked about there's 4,250 ability interactions, even within the same set of abilities versus each other, like Jarvan EQ versus Nautilus Q, you might actually have 3 different things that happen depending on what time into the ability you use it at. So you see how complicated League gets, because depending on the timing and all this stuff, it just all completely changes. Okay, so let's get into now understanding that those are some of the things that really help me improve and then go from Diamond to Masters. And then really my journey from Masters to Challenger was just more of the same, getting better camera control, getting more intentional with how I was using my abilities, better and better and better, and just improving that process. I also was a lot more conscious with how I was playing the game. So I'm constantly thinking in my head, what am I doing next? Can we go in here? Can we not go in here? A lot more basically just, rather than playing based on my feelings. Well, I'll put it into a point like this. I actually have like a feeling of what I want to do. And then in my head, I know this feeling of what I want to do is actually wrong. And I don't know if that's because I built bad habits when I was low rank for a long time, but it's basically like I have a bad habit that I can feel that I want to do something wrong. It's like Lee syndrome, where like you hit a Q on Lee Sin and no matter what, you want to go in and Q, right? It's like I'll see somebody do something really egregious on Braum, and like no matter what, I just want to go in and hit that person. But I have to combat that own feeling within myself, because I know that, okay, because we don't know where the jungler is, we really shouldn't. And I have to prevent myself from playing more aggressively, because I have a natural tendency to feel like I want to play a certain way, feel like I want to play very aggressively. And I'm retraining. That's the areas, I guess, where I'm retraining my habits. So I found actually that when I have this feeling that I want to do something in a game, but I know it's the wrong thing to do, right now I'm constantly battling myself and retraining. Okay, don't do that. And so when I'm thinking consciously about what I should be doing, it helps me to prevent situations like that where I'm kind of autopiloting, reverting back to that feeling-based play where I just try to punish something really heavily that maybe isn't that big of a deal, or they can get away with because their jungler's there or whatever, and then it ends up losing a game or putting us in a bad spot. And so listen to your better judgment, because you're probably going to have a feeling of what you want to do and a feeling of what you know is right, but you're going to want to ignore the feeling of what you know is right to do in the game because it doesn't feel as fun, doesn't feel as good, and it feels bad to let your opponent get away with something. But a lot of times you've got to go with your better judgment, in order to be retraining your bad habits, I would say. So now that we understand what my rank journey has been like, and I've given definitely some advice along the way for sure, let's go back and think, if I was going back then to the beginning of my learning process, how would I, as a newer player, go through the learning process at different ranks? Number one, like I said, boom, I pick up a fresh account, I'm a new player to the game, and I would recommend that this person tries as many different champions as they're interested in as many different roles. I would say, rather than spending, and we're trying to be as efficient as possible about this, so rather than spending the full time committing to playing a 30-minute normal game or something on a champion, what I would tell them to do is you're going to go watch champion spotlights. And here's the cool thing, especially for champions you're interested in, because let's say that you decide, okay, well, maybe I'm not that interested in trying that champion or something like that now that I see what they're like. Even if that's the case, now you've just learned a lot about that champion, even if you don't remember 100% of it. So the number one thing I would do is I have to understand, in order to play the game, I need to know what's going on in the game. In order to know what's going on with the game, the most important thing, I mean, there's static stuff on the map, how towers work, how dragons work, etc. But the most important thing is going to be to learn what the champions do. So I need to go learn what the champions do. And I think the best way to learn what a champion does is, number one, to spend the 5 minutes watching the champion spotlight. That's about the most efficient way that you can do it, because you're just getting fed the most important key information about those champions' abilities and stuff like that and what they do. Number two would be to take that champion into a practice tool game and mess around with the champion's abilities versus a target dummy, so that you get that feel for it yourself without having to commit the full 30 minutes to a game. And then maybe the third one would be read the Wikipedia, the league wiki for that champion. But that's a little bit more intensive, because if you're a newer player or you're not that good at the game, sometimes for me reading that, I don't even know what a certain thing means. Even as a challenger player, it's written in a weird way, or there are terms used and I'm not sure whether it means this or that. That can happen with like max health abilities, for example. Does it mean that it's dealing damage based on the enemy's max health? Or in the case of Braum, right, Braum's Q does more damage based on his max health. So I think especially for new players, things like that can be very confusing. But eventually, once it's more comprehensible, definitely the league wiki is going to give you sometimes more information than the champion spotlights. And it is about as brief as you can get it, which is just a paragraph that explains exactly what it does and all of the numbers behind it. That's the other thing. The champion spotlight doesn't really give you the numbers, but the numbers are kind of useless until you're familiar enough with the game in order to get it. Basically, what I would do is come up with a plan of, I need to learn what all the champions in the game do, but it's going to take a long time because there's like 170 of them. Well, if I learn what one new champion does each day, then in just 6 months, in half of a year, I'll learn what all of them do pretty well. If I just spend 10 minutes each day learning a champion, that's easy, right? Like, that's not as hard as people make it out to be. It's a lot of commitment for sure. But I mean, by the time I had spent half a year playing League, I had just barely gotten to level 30 and started playing ranked. So if you had someone who was starting ranked today or starting normals today, like starting for the first time, they could learn all the champions by the time they start playing ranked. Every single one, even in modern League. So it's not that bad. But yeah, it's a lot of work. And the thing is that your level of commitment, right, to the game and how much time you're willing to put in, and knowing that you're willing to do that, goes up the longer you've put into the game. So it doesn't occur to people that they should have done that until they're already committed enough to the game that it would have been worth putting in, whatever it would be, like 1,700 minutes, which is like, I mean, that's not that bad actually. So if you were doing 10 minutes a champion, it'd be 1,700 minutes, which is 28 hours. Well, you're not committed to spending a full day. I mean, if you're talking about just, you're not committed to spending a full 24 hours, full 28 hours learning something if you're just starting it and you're not even sure, how serious you're taking and what you're doing with it. But if I was starting over and I was trying to be the best, or maybe more realistically, you're in gold, you're in platinum, you're in emerald, but you haven't learned them all, I would start learning the champions, one champion a day, 10 minutes a day, watch the champion spotlight, read a little bit of the champions wiki, maybe take the champion into practice tool if you own it and you can do that. I still think Riot should make all the champions available to everyone in practice tool, so you can get a feel for them and things like that and try them out. And you're doing two things at once here. You're simultaneously trying to find a champion that you're going to, and a role that you're going to enjoy playing, while getting to avoid, okay, I've seen what this champion can do, I don't need to spend a 30-minute game on it, so you're saving time that way. You're also learning what the champions do. And then the other big thing is I would go to a site like op.gg, and I would, so let's say you're learning support, I would just go to op.gg here real quick, and I would say, what is the most played support right now? Okay, it's Lulu, Nami, Thresh. And you could just do something like this, even if you're a higher ranked player. Do I know exactly how all of Lulu's abilities work? And I'm, again, not just talking about we know her Q is a line, skill shot that does some damage and slows. Her W can polymorph you or give her 80 carry movement speed and attack speed. Her E is a shield. Her ult is a heal and a knock up. I'm talking about, do you know all of the details of Lulu's abilities? Like, do you know how her Q shooting from multiple places in different directions works? Do you know that her ult actually slows people in a duration around the person that she's given the ult to? Aside from the knockup, there's additional CC to it. Did you know that? If you don't know details like that, and you probably don't even know what you don't know, if you don't know details like that, then you probably ought to read the champion's Wikipedia page, even if you're higher ranked. Because I'm telling you, I have played support 11,000 games and hit Challenger, and it wasn't until recently, like 2 weeks ago, it wasn't until after I've hit Challenger that I realized that Lulu ult slows. I had no idea. Okay, I thought that I knew all the little intricacies of how Lulu worked, even as far as, she when she puts her E on somebody, it moves picks to that person, and her Q, kind of like a ZQ coming from a W, ZW is shooting from two different places. When her E is out on somebody or picks is out on somebody, and then if it's just on her, then she's just shooting it both from the same place. She puts her cursor behind the person. When she's got E on them, then the second bolt is just going to miss the person because it'll just shoot out from behind them. Whereas if she aims it, her cursor like on top of the person or right in front of them, it'll shoot them back opposite directions as each other and hit both of them onto the enemy target that she's E'd and put picks on. I thought I knew a lot of intricacies to Lulu that most people didn't know. But it turns out, even for me, there's stuff about Lulu I didn't know, right? So you just go down the list and you look at what are the most popular champions and start learning the most popular champions first. Because look at this. If you just learned the 10 most popular support champions, let me just add them up real quick. I'll do some estimates here so this doesn't take too long. 7% on Yuumi, 7% on Pyke, 7% on Alistar, 8% Braum is being picked, 9% of the time Nautilus is being picked, 9% of the time Milio is being picked. We'll call Karma 10%, and we'll call Thresh 12%, and then 13% on Nami. We'll go down a little bit because we've been over 14% on Lulu. The top 10 champions right here, and this is Emerald Plus, so you might get more variety in the lower rank. The top 10 most played support champions here are 96% of the games. So to be honest with you, if you just learn, forget about 170 champions, if you just learn the top 10 most popular champions in support, 80 carry, mid, jungle, top, and especially starting with your own role, you're going to learn 96% of your games, you know exactly what's going on. And that is good enough to be totally fine, right, until you get really deep into ranked, until you're really working on little things, and now you're working on the little things and you can be like, okay, I really need to know what Shen support does, or whatever, or Hui support. To be honest, it's not as important as people think. I can't tell you exactly what all Hui can do. I mean, I know what a lot of his abilities look like. I've played against it plenty of times, but I don't know all of the nuances of Hui at all yet. I haven't learned them all yet. I haven't bothered to watch enough and read. I've never pulled up Hui's Wikipedia page, so I have no idea. I know the basics. I know enough to get by in a game versus a champion, but to pretend like I know what Hui does, like I know what a Braum or a Lulu does, I just don't. So the reality is you can get to really high rank without knowing exactly what every champion in the game does, but you need to know the basics. So I'd start with the most frequent pertinent information that I'm seeing, which is I'd start with the most popular champions in my role, then the most popular champion, let's say you're a solo laner, then in jungle, or if you're a support, then in AD carry. If you're an AD carry, then in support. Then after that, if you're an AD carry or support, then in jungle, right, et cetera, et cetera. Then you learn enough that you're getting by totally fine at the same time as you're going through all of these champions, and especially in your role first, to find out what champions you might be interested in playing without having to waste the 30 minutes playing them, to test it out for a game or whatever and decide that you don't like it. Then you get to a point where, okay, I've tested a bunch of different champions in a bunch of different roles, and I know that I'm really committed and I really like playing X. And then I would spam that as soon as I figured it out, all the way until I'm level 30. And then if I'm feeling good and I'm feeling comfortable, I go straight into ranked. I don't think it's worth spending more time in normal games. The higher quality practice you get, the better. And it doesn't matter how long you spend in bronze. I'd much rather start in bronze 3 or bronze 4 or even iron and start working on my game in ranked than continue to play normal games in hopes that I get placed, that I skip part of my ranked journey and start in silver 4 or something like that. Because you're just going to get higher quality practice in those ranked games where people are taking the games more seriously, where there's more on the line and at stake. It just makes more sense to practice ranked and ranked. And it's not going to hurt you in any long-term sort of way to start lower. It doesn't hurt. So that's what I would do for my leveling journey. Then when I get to bronze, hopefully I'd know what all the champions in the game do, because as I said, if it took me 6 months to learn all, half of you, where I'm getting that from is there's 360 days in a year, 365. So if I was learning 170 champions, that's roughly about half the year. So in about 6 months, by the time I get level 30, hopefully I know all of the champions, or I know 90% of them. And the 10% that I don't know are the bottom most picked champions that are only going to come up in 1 or 2% of my ranked games or whatever. So I have a really good understanding of what the champions do compared to most people. Now what I'm thinking about is learning the ability interactions for my champion that I'm maining. So I'd focus on one champion or a very small pool of maybe 2 or 3 champions max. And the higher rank you go, the more it can be. So, and I'll give specific numbers. So I'd say, unless you just can't stand doing it, because again, being interested in playing the game is more important. Otherwise, you'll just quit. But if you have this goal of both having fun, enjoying the process, but also getting high rank, one champion is best all the way until diamond. When you're in diamond, maybe 2 or 3 champions. When you're in masters, maybe 2 or 3 champions. And then when you get into GM and challenger and your goal is no longer about what solo queue rank you are and your goal is to get onto a team, then work on being able to play 10 champions at that level. And by the time that you know what it takes to learn a champion at a really high level anyways, it'll be so much more efficient for you to learn 7 new champions and be really good at 3 already, or to be really good at 1 or 2 already. So much more efficient to learn those champions once you're already GM or challenger than trying to learn them at the same time as you're learning the game. So don't put hundreds of games into 10 different champions on your way to masters, which I did. Instead, put all your games into 1 or 2 champions, whatever, however many you need in order to be able to make climbing palatable to you. And then when you get to GM challenger and you're concerned about getting on a team, then learn the champions, because it'll be so much more efficient. Okay, so you're playing very limited number of champions, hopefully 1, maybe 2, right? And you're working on that, and you're learning now what those ability interactions do. So if you know what all the champions do, and you're starting to learn, okay, this is how my E works against this ability, and this is how my Q works against this Q. You get to a point where you start asking yourself, okay, knowing how all of these interactions work, when I go into champion select and into loading screen, what are the best ways I could possibly use these abilities? So if I'm against an Ornn and an MF as Braum, I'm thinking I'm going to use my E to eat the Ornn ult, and I'm going to use my ult to knock up the MF and cancel her ult during a team fight. So now I know where to position during a team fight, more or less. I mean, obviously there's more to Braum than just canceling those 2 abilities in a fight. But even if that's all you did in a fight, that would be a pretty successful team fight for a Braum player if you pull that off. So what I'm thinking is I need to position in a way where when I see MF opening, I'm close enough to MF that I'm tethering her with my ult range so that I'm able to get in there and knock her up quick enough when she starts. I'm watching her positioning and seeing whether she's looking like she's backing up or dropping her E and getting ready to ult. Same thing with Ornn. And so I know where to look during a team fight. I know where to position during a team fight. And I'm going to position that way and save my abilities for those situations. And then I'm just going to be patient and hold it. And if you get into a loading screen or champion select and you're like, I don't know how my E interacts with this guy's E, then maybe you look to try that in that game, or maybe you Google it. Or, you find a YouTube video about how it works, or you find somebody who's commented about how it works, or some Reddit post where somebody's asked how it works or something and gotten an answer. You can also join like champion main Discords and Reddits and stuff like that. So for example, like I'm in the Braum mains Discord. I know how every single one of Braum's abilities interacts with anything. So if anyone ever came in there and asked me a question about like, or asked a question in the Braum Discord about like, how does Braum E work versus Karthus ult, right? I'd be able to answer the question and help that person out. And I'd say, it basically, you can't block it for anyone else because it's not a projectile, but you can block the damage for yourself. But the weird thing about Karthus ult is that you have to be facing the direction that Karthus is ulting from, because if you get hit in the back or whatever, similar to Pantheon E, if you get hit in the back on Braum, your E's not going to block it. Well, I don't exactly know why, but against Karthus, unless you're turned towards him, it's not like you even have to be completely to his back, but if you're turned sideways to him or perpendicular to him or whatever, he'll still hit you with the damage even though you popped your E. And a lot of times that means, well, he's ulting out of fog and we don't know where he is. So what you're going to do is you're going to use your E to block the damage for yourself so you can live versus Karthus ult, but you're going to turn to face the majority of the map if you don't know where he is. So, you're looking at the map here, and if I'll put my nose here because I don't have any more fingers. If you're, down here in the bot lane, he's probably somewhere up here, right? In this big triangle. This is not working so well. He's somewhere up in this big triangle of map up here where we don't know where he is. So if we're down here in the bot lane, we're going to point our E out towards the rest of the map so that we're most likely to be pointed towards where Karthus is at in his jungle and block the E. Even better if we can back ourselves up towards the edge of the map, the wall, so that we're, versus a very wide angle against the Karthus, and almost always it'll block it for you. So weird interaction, right? It takes a while to learn that. Probably took me Eing versus Karthus ult a couple of times at least to figure out what's going on there. And you're not always in a spot where you're comfortable doing that or trying that in a game because you may want to use your E for something else better. So, it takes a while to figure that out. But if you go in and ask in a Discord, somebody knows the answer to your question, they're usually happy to help. All of a sudden, you're outsourcing this learning to people who have already put in the time to learn this. And now you're getting really good at Braum really fast because other people are giving you all this high-level information about how things work that you didn't even know. So, things like that. But basically, I would focus on my one champion, try to be learning the ability interaction. So I go back and I do the same thing. Remember how we went to ob.gg and we said, I need to know how Lulu works and Nami and Thresh because these are the most common support champions right now. Well, I go back and ask myself, okay, let's say I'm playing Braum, how does Braum work versus Lulu, right? Is there any special ability interactions? We should probably define that. So how I said there's all these ability interactions, thousands and thousands of them, too many to learn. What I would consider a special ability interaction are the examples I've been giving. Braum ult versus MF ult, where it cancels it. Or Braum E versus Ornn ult, where it would be like what we would call a cancel, right? Something like that, where we know that this is how this thing works. It does something special. So like if Braum Qs at a Caitlyn at the same time as Caitlyn Qs at the Braum, the projectiles don't like hit each other in midair and bounce off of each other. So they have a pretty predictable normal interaction where they just don't interact with each other. And so what we care about is how the abilities interact in some sort of special way. So let's think about some of these, right? So for what we would do is we go down and we already know what, now we've learned the top 10 support champions, but we want to know now how our champion interacts with them. So Braum passive isn't going to really change or interact differently by anything that Lulu does, right? I mean, I suppose she can stop him from autoing, but I mean, that's relatively self-explanatory. That's nothing special. She sees him, he's going to stop autoing. Like, duh, like that's not a special ability interaction. Special ability interaction between Braum and Lulu, for example, might be that if Lulu goes to polymorph your AD carry, right, with their W, but you're standing in front of your AD carry with your E up on Braum, you're actually going to get polymorphed instead of your AD carry, because polymorph is actually a skill shot, believe it or not. It's not a skill shot. It's a targeted ability, but it's a projectile, is what I should say. And so if she tries to use it through a Braum E or over a Braum E will intercept her W. So you might randomly get polymorphed on Braum and be like, why did that happen? Or you may be able to stop her from polymorphing an ally that you'd rather be able to do stuff and hit rather than them getting polymorphed. You'd rather you get polymorphed. So you throw up your E and get in front of them when she looks like she's going to do that. Another thing would be just kind of a basic CC cancel, is that you can buffer things like, just like with most champions in the game, Braum spends a little bit of time to throw his Q or to throw his ult. So if you throw your Q early enough, right before you get knocked up by Lulu ult, or right before you get polymorphed by your W, your Q or your ult will continue to fire out while you're being CC'd, which means the time you would be stuck casting that ability anyways is overlapping with the time she's CCing you. So you spend less time effectively CC'd because you were going to self-CC yourself at that point anyways. So that's what we would consider like a CC cancel. So that can be a little bit difficult to do, I would say, with Lulu's CC, because her W and her ult are pretty instantaneous. And there's not a lot of warning in the way that, like, there, hers are instant. So there's no animation, no wind up that you can see that she's going to do, other than maybe walking at you, to know that you should have to do that at that time. And of course, maybe casting your Q or your ult at a time of your choosing, rather than when she's going to CC you, is much more valuable than casting it just because it is a CC cancel, or just because it saves you a second, right? Like, you'd rather ult somebody as Braum when you're not CC'd or not about to be CC'd and can follow up on your ult, rather than just trading ult for ult or whatever. So there's things like that, but you'd want to know how these interactions work. So the main one for Lulu and Braum would be that you can intercept polymorph. Like for Nami versus Braum, right? We need to know that Braum ult, or not Braum ult, Nami ult gets eaten by Braum E, but unfortunately not in the same way as Ornn works. With Nami, you don't disappear her ult really. You'll still get knocked up yourself. It just disappears it past you so that none of your teammates behind you get knocked up. But still, during a team fight against a Nami, it's going to be really important to to hold your E as Braum for when Nami ults in position in front of your team in the way that you would with maybe an Ornn ult or something like that to block the ability. Actually, with an Ornn ult, you'd want to be kind of behind your team, but that's aside from the point. So you get the idea. You'd go through and you'd think about these champions. And let's say that you don't know that. You don't know how Nami Q interacts with Braum E. If you don't know, for whatever reason, because Braum gets really big when his E is activated and he wants to eat projectiles coming into him, but he'll get CC'd by something that hits him, he will eat the Nami bubble. And because Nami bubble is, like, he'll get hit with a Nami bubble he normally wouldn't get hit with because his E makes his hitbox bigger. And because Nami bubble is AoE, unfortunately, if you're standing on top of or next to your AD carry, it will bubble you and your AD carry as well. It will not like stop the bubble at you. So for whatever reason with that one, right, you just have to know that it's really bad to preemptively throw up your E on Braum versus Nami, because if she still has her Q, she will just get like a free Q on both you and your AD carry. And Nami Q is really hard to hit, so giving them a free way to, it's like a magnet pulling her Q towards you. So giving them a free Nami bubble is really bad. The other thing, right, is that normally if they miss the Nami bubble behind you or something, or in front of you, you'd have a little bit of wiggle room to finesse forward and backward from the NAMI bubble. But even if the NAMI bubble is coming over top of you to go behind you, Braum is going to suck that in and you're going to get bubbled because it's not allowed to travel behind you. So you're just going to get bubbled no matter where she shoots it, as long as it's going anywhere towards you. So you have to know that so that you don't CC yourself or give her free EQs. And if you're the NAMI player, you know that if Braum throws his E up when you still got your Q, you should always throw your Q out at him because it's a really easy free bubble to hit. And normally it's kind of difficult to hit those bubbles. So getting a free Q in a trade feels pretty nice. So, let's say you don't know those interactions between the Nami Q and the Nami ult and Lulu W and Braum or whatever, or you're just running for blanks. So when you think of the matchup, ask people, right, or Google it. How does Braum E interact with Nami ult, and you will find an answer Googling it in like 10 seconds. So after you've learned what all the champions in the game do, you can learn some of the important ability interactions between the main champions you're playing against in your lane. So between that and then, of course, never starting with locked camera, I would have started with my camera completely unlocked so that the patterns I'm building from the very beginning are built off of the maximum amount of information that's possible, and so that I'm constantly getting better at my camera control the entire time I'm also getting better at the game. All these things are great and going to help you improve a lot. And then I would also, of course, when it comes to ping, we've talked about this before, your computer setup, ping, FPS, all this stuff. What I will say is that it is pretty important, and I feel like it was a major factor in me getting better. And there's not a lot that you can do about ping, because ping's the time that it takes, more or less, not a tech person, but ping is more or less the time that it takes for the packets or whatever, or information from your computer to get to the Riot server in Chicago. And so a lot of that is just location based, right? So if you're in Seattle, you're in California, it's going to take a long time to get to Chicago. Now, not very long, right? It's going to take 60 milliseconds or whatever. So 100 would be a tenth of a second. So it's going to take 60 milliseconds. So even less than a tenth of a second, right? But still, it makes a big difference, a really big difference. And it feels like a lot more than that. I don't know how best to describe it, but basically more or less it's location based. So there's not a lot you can do about it. But one of the things that you can do about it is, number one, is if you have fiber available in your area, having a fiber internet connection speeds up your ping, which is unique to fiber internet. Speeding up your download and upload speed is not going to change your ping at all, although it can be nice for other reasons, but it's not going to change your ping at all. But fiber internet will speed up your ping. So for example, like Milwaukee to Chicago with fiber is like 4 ping, but without fiber is more like 10 ping. So it makes a big difference to have fiber versus not having fiber, if that's an option that's available, because there's no other real way to reduce ping. The other thing that you can do to help with ping is to use an Ethernet cord directly to your router rather than using the Wi-Fi connection. Can be a lot better. And I think it would definitely affect like download and upload speed. I don't know if it can help with ping. I think it can a little bit. Another thing, there are different Ethernet cables that have different speeds depending on how old they are. So if you're using a really old Ethernet cable, it's probably not the latest generation of Ethernet cable, and it will be slower than if you get a new Ethernet cable, and it's just an Ethernet cable, so it's like $5-10. Another thing, another big tip, is that when your router is coming into your house, the less cable you have, the better, right? You want that connection to be literally physically as short as possible. And the cable that they have out on the street is this high quality, massive cable. Whereas the cable that you have here coming into your house in your office is not as high quality. So you will lose quite a bit of connection, I think, both in terms of ping, it'll slow your ping down, and it'll slow your upload and download speed down. The longer your cable in your house runs. So ideally, you want the entrance point of the cable into your house even from the street, to be as short as possible. So if you're on like a farm or something like that, and the street is 400 feet away from your house, you're doomed. Because by the time that they run that smaller cable all the way to your house, your connection is shot. But I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to move your house closer to the street? You're just kind of cooked. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe there's a solution for that. But in my case, we have a short distance from the street to the house, and then we know where the cable comes in. So my office is wherever the cable is coming into the house, basically. So keep those things in mind. There are some practical ways to get your ping better. Same thing, I think, with the cable itself, too. There's probably different generations of cable, like the Ethernet cord, that are faster or slower. And so having a nice new Ethernet or nice new cable to your router is also good. If you have like a router and a modem, obviously the cord between those two being shorter is also better. Although actually you don't really need the modem if you're connected. If you're connected with an Ethernet cable, right, you're coming directly out of the router, so you don't necessarily need the modem. Anyways, I'm not a techie. I don't know all this stuff. What I'm saying is that over the years that I've learned little things like this to help optimize that. And to be honest, if you can, spend a little bit of time doing that and it shaves a ping or two off, it's mega worth it. There's just some little things like that. And a lot of times your internet company will come out for free and, they're not going to set up your desk for you or whatever, but your internet company will help you with stuff like this. Like they will put the cable through your wall wherever you want it. Like they will help you, for the most part, set up exactly where you want the cable coming through, even probably into your house, to be honest, if you wanted them to move it, although that's a massive thing to have them do. But a lot of times the cable company will come out to your house for free and, and help you fix some of your setup. They're not going to give you a fresh new Ethernet cable or something, but they will definitely come out and try to shorten your cable connection and stuff like that, and have it come into the house and through the wall where you want it to go for free in a lot of cases. So that's been my experience. I've had a good experience with cable companies for the most part. Probably pretty unique in that. Well, except for that time Comcast throttled me, but we won't get into that. So that's why, anyways. So, other than reporting Comcast to the FCC, we've been good. But yeah, so things like that are really actually quite important. Obviously, FPS, you want a computer, League for whatever reason, and I think it's probably a good thing, but League can only run up to 360 FPS. If you try to run League at more than 360 FPS, it stutters and kind of creates a weird fake lag, even though your connection's actually really, really good and your computer is insane. It creates kind of a fake lag, and I don't know if it's intentionally done to help maintain competitive integrity and not let people run their system at like 1000 FPS compared to somebody playing at 60, but the higher FPS, the better. And the reason why it's better to have higher FPS is because even if your monitor has a low refresh rate and can't display 1000 frames per second, like people do this with Counter-Strike, even if your monitor can only display 144 frames per second or 60, when you're generating 1000, the one that it picks from is going to be the most recent one. So your monitor is displaying a much more updated and recent image than if you were only generating 144. So what a lot of people think for some reason is that when you're playing on a 60 hertz monitor, you should lock your FPS at 60, or that when you're playing on a 144 hertz monitor, you should lock your FPS at 144, and that's actually wrong. You want to be generating as many frames as you can, even if your monitor can only display a certain number, because the more recent your frame is, the better and the more up-to-date your game will feel and the less laggy it will feel. And yes, you can definitely feel this. If you compare a 144 hertz monitor with 144 FPS to a 360 hertz or a 144 hertz monitor, same monitor, but you have 360 FPS, you can and will notice the difference, and it's worth it. So you want to get your FPS to 360 with League because that's the highest it can handle. For whatever reason, like I said, there's no way to fix. I've had a lot of, attempts at fixing this and talking to Riot support to try to fix it, but that's just the way the game is built. It can't handle more than 360. Maybe it's for competitive integrity reasons, I'm not sure. So I really recommend getting a 360 hertz monitor and a computer that can run League at 360 FPS, and then capping your FPS at 360. But a couple of things real quick here. One, if you can't afford that, that's fine, right? But then 144 hertz monitor is, so of the most important things, being able to run League at 360 FPS no matter what monitor you're on is the most important. So a decent computer, and it doesn't have to be an insane computer, but good enough to run League at 360 is important. Keep in mind that it will vary, so it will drop in team fights and stuff like that. So preferably a computer that could run it at 360 even during the middle of a team fight, but you know, what are you going to get? You're going to get what you're going to get. And so that's really important. The FPS is more important. Upgrading from 60 to 144 is a bigger upgrade than upgrading from 144 to 240, which is a bigger upgrade than upgrading from 240 to 360. So if you're pressed for budget, you're probably going to focus on upgrading what you can instead of going all the way to 360. Even if that means you're not getting the highest hertz monitor that you can run League at, that's all fine. But your practice is going to be higher quality, and you're going to learn better, and you're going to have a much better experience with the time that you put into the game if you have a setup that is fluid and working properly. So I put a lot of emphasis on having a computer that's able to run League at 360 FPS, having a monitor that's 360 hertz. And then the last thing is that in League settings in game, it only lets you cap your monitor's FPS at 240 or maybe it's whatever it is. And so in order to cap it at 360, you have to do that in your usually NVIDIA settings. So you can't do that. And I think I've made a video on this before, but you cannot cap your League FPS at 360 in game. You have to do it through your graphics settings. So if you've got a 60 hertz monitor and you're trying to cap it at 360 FPS, or you've got a 144 hertz monitor and you're trying to cap it at 360 FPS or whatever, go do that in your graphics card settings. If you can't figure that out, you should probably Google it and figure it out. But if for some reason you can't, I guess capping it at 240 in game is better than keeping it at 40 or keeping it at 60 or whatever. And then vertical sync, so one exception to this too is if you run into screen tearing, which I've never ran into before, but one reason why people like to cap their FPS at the same refresh rate as their monitor is that screen tearing can't happen. Screen tearing is really weird and obvious. It'll be like half of your screen is a little section of your screen is the old frame and some of it is the new frame. So it's like updating different parts of your screen at different rates. It'll be really obvious if that problem is happening to you. I've never run into this problem ever before, and I don't think most people do. If you are, look into it. I'm not really sure what goes on with that. Probably more of a problem with the monitor, if anything else, than having to run it on vertical sync, because you shouldn't have to run your game on vertical sync. What vertical sync does is it says, we'll prevent that from happening by forcing your refresh rate, even if you've got your setting ticked to 240. If you have vertical sync set on in your League video settings or in your graphics card settings, then all of your, even if you set it to 240 FPS or 360, it's going to still limit it to 144 FPS if you have a 144 hertz monitor. Another thing about that is when you get a higher than 60 hertz monitor, you have to right click on your desktop and you have to go into display settings, and then you have to go to advanced display. And then when it says choose a refresh rate, you have to actually select the refresh rate that your monitor is capable of supporting. So unfortunately, what that can mean is that I did this for a year or something. When I first got a 144 hertz monitor, I plugged it in and assumed that it would be just working at 144 hertz. And because I didn't change that one setting, I spent a year playing at 60 hertz on a 144 hertz monitor. And so you actually have to change a setting on your Windows display settings in order to actually run your, if you have a 360 hertz monitor, actually run it at 360 or whatever, at 240 or 144. Only case you'd be fine is if you have an old 60 hertz monitor and you're just stuck at 60 because that's the default, whatever. Then you don't have to change anything, right? Don't get a 60 hertz monitor. I think it's especially tragic if somebody has a really good computer that can run League very, very well at a high FPS, and you're wasting your lifetime on your computer, because let's say your computer is able to keep up with League like that for like 4 or 5 years or something like that before it starts to become too slow. It's like, well, if you waste years of your computer's life with a 60 hertz monitor, what is the point of having and running the game at 60 FPS? What is the point of having put like 1.5K into an amazing computer if you're so cheap when it comes to your monitor? It doesn't make sense, but people do this all the time. You've put 1.5K into a computer, but because you're not willing to put more than $100 into the monitor, you've spent 1.6K to run League effectively at the same rate, 60 FPS, 60 hertz, that you could have run, a $200, $300 laptop on, so that just doesn't make any sense. And you waste years of your computer's life because your computer won't be able to keep up forever. It won't maintain that FPS on the game forever. You're wasting a lot of money, because if you think about your 1.6K setup as, per year, you're paying, I don't know what that would be, $400 a year for the setup. So if you spend $400 that first year or for 2 years running it at a super suboptimal 60 hertz and 60 FPS, I don't know what you're doing, right? Because you've just wasted $400, $800 of your computer's life with a bad monitor. But better late than never to fix that, right? So really important that your practice is high quality on a good setup if you know that you're committed to League, or you have the money to have a proper gaming setup or whatever. And again, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. You can probably get away with a computer that's a lot cheaper than 1.5K. You don't have to get a good gaming PC to be able to run League at 360 FPS. It's not the most intensive game. Everybody knows that's Minecraft, right? So you don't need the most amazing computer to run League at 360 FPS. Although I will say League is getting a lot less and less optimized over the years. Too many fancy abilities. Unironically, the new map from Season 4, which we're on now, and too many fancy champions and abilities, especially during team fights when there's a lot of stuff going on. It's way worse than it used to be. The game's just less optimized. They're getting lazier because computers are getting better. The champions are able to do too much. There's just too much power creep in the game. And that's actually unironically taking some of that out on your frame rate, unfortunately. But you don't, you probably get by. I would be curious what the cheapest setup would be. But you could probably get by with, even a $1,000 PC, kind of okay PC. Probably get by with that and a 360 hertz monitor, and you'd probably be better off than most people playing League. And probably cheaper than a lot of people. But, one thing to keep in mind is that you may want to get a computer that's slightly better, that's able to, you don't want to aim for the computer that's barely able to hit 360 FPS now, because again, in 1 year and 2 years, it won't be able to anymore. And then, if you're upgrading more frequently, then it's not worth it either. So, you're aiming for that if you're aiming for a good setup for League, but you don't need to overkill it, because you don't need to be able to run League at 1,000 FPS, because you can't. So that's kind of your hardware stuff, which I think is really important. So to get back to the original question, like how would I go about improving at League now? I would focus on learning the top 10 champions in each role, which are going to cover 96% of your game scenarios. I would focus on finding one champion that I really like in a role that I really enjoy, playing at both the level that I'm at now, but also what it looks like to play that champion at a higher rank. And I stick to just playing that champion for a while, so that I can learn how their abilities interact with the other champions that they're playing against in game. If I don't know how they work, then I would try to experiment in game to figure out the ability interactions, or I'd ask people and Google and research how the ability interactions work, especially with the other top 10 champions in my role that I'm going to be seeing all the time in 96% of my games. And then I'd have a pretty complete picture of what's going on with the game, and I would have improved a lot faster. So now instead of it taking, 2,428 games to go from bronze to diamond, maybe it takes a lot less. Instead of it taking 3,560 games to go from diamond to masters, having unlocked my screen earlier, I did flashbang here. I thought this was closed. Maybe this takes a lot less time because this is a time period where I spent a lot of time hard stuck. So just a couple of details I wanted to add about my own personal journey, right? The vast number of new champions that there are in the game is going to make your bronze to diamond climb slower than mine was. And the vast amount of Smurfs that there are is going to make your bronze to diamond climb slower than mine was back in season 3 and season 4 when there weren't nearly as many Smurfs. One thing that I looked at here, well, I'll keep going. Another thing that's going to help or hurt here with bronze to diamond is that I had no PC gaming experience. I was coming from being a console player, and so I was learning mouse and keyboard and all that stuff for the first time on a really scuffed setup. I was on a Mac laptop with a trackpad with 2 gigabytes of RAM, right? So obviously, one of the reasons why I'm putting some emphasis on that is because if you were starting from the beginning with either a PC gaming background or with mouse and keyboard experience or with low ping and a good computer that can run League at 360 FPS on a 360 hertz monitor, this number is going to shrink drastically. So, and then the lock screen thing was one of the things that really kept me stuck here diamond to masters for so long, as well as the server moving and my ping going up. So you probably typically wouldn't experience being stuck diamond to masters for as many games as I was, because the server's probably not going to move on you in a very negative way, and because you're hopefully playing with your camera either unlocked from before then or whatever from the beginning, and you're going to have an emphasis on ability interactions and stuff like that before getting all the way to diamond instead of way deep into your run in diamond. So let's talk about the Smurf problem a little bit, because this was something that was really wild. When we went to the leaderboards here, I went back to, it's like page 5,000 or something or so. And we can just kind of take a look here. So this is like gold 3. But we can kind of flip through here and look at some different ones. So like if we go back to like page 6,000, let's say, so here's gold for 0LP. What I want you to look at is the level of these accounts and how many of these accounts are Smurfs. So we're going to look for accounts that are like maybe level 200 or below that are gold 4. So here we've got one, maybe not a Smurf because this one's on the upper limit, right? This is potentially a Smurf, maybe not. Maybe it's a new player who's learning fast. This one's got only 99 levels, so this could be potentially a Smurf. Losing a lot of games though, but maybe they just suck. Could be somebody learning another role. Level 71, this guy's also doing pretty poorly, but interesting. Level 32, probably a Smurf. Level 86, level 83, here's 163, 97, 67, 190, 37, 88, 43, 61, 110, 42 over level 42 over here, level 40. You get the idea. So this right here is 100 accounts on this page. It's just kind of a small sample to look at to get an idea of what's going on here. And again, not all of these look like they're Smurf accounts, but I did a little bit of math just to think about, what's going on here with the Smurfs. I don't even remember. This video is going on so long. I may have even said this in the same video, but I'm just going to reiterate this, right? So if a Smurf is in, let's see, basically when you play a game in low elo and you're actually a low elo player, there's a 5 out of, well, not a 5 out of 5 chance, but there's 5 players that could potentially be a Smurf on the other team. And because you're not a Smurf, there's only 4 players that could potentially be a Smurf on your team. You've probably heard this argument before when it comes to like AFKs or trolling or something like that, that like you benefit from people who are AFKing and trolling in your climb, because as long as you never do those things, you're more likely to win against that than to lose against it, or to lose because of it on your team, because there's only 4 people. So you probably heard that before, but what you probably haven't heard is that this works, unfortunately, the opposite way with smurfing, which is that you're more likely to face a Smurf than you are to have a Smurf on your team. So what we assumed here, just as an example, is that because of that, you have 5 out of 9 players in the game could be a Smurf on the enemy team, and 4 out of 9 players in the game could be a Smurf on your team, which is 55% roughly minus 44% roughly on your team, which ends up giving you roughly 11%, 11% more Smurfs on the other team than on your team. If those Smurfs have a 60% win rate, then if there's a Smurf in every game, the differential that it would make on your win rate as a silver or gold player or whatever is 6.66%, which is a lot. Now, that's if there's one Smurf in every single game on average. Obviously, some games you're going to have one Smurf on your team and the other team. Some games you're going to have no Smurfs. Some games you're going to have even more than that. But that's the gist of it, is that if there is an average of one Smurf in every single game, you will lose an extra 6 point... no. Hold on a second. Yeah, you'll lose an extra 6.66% of games because of it, which is massive. That means that if you're a player, and assuming my math is correct, it's early, so forgive me, maybe someone will correct me, but assuming my math is correct, if you're a silver or gold player nowadays, right, if there is a Smurf in every single game on average, you're going to see a 6.66% lower win rate because of the Smurfs. That is a serious problem, right? Because even if we're seeing a Smurf every other game on average, which may be more realistic, we're still talking about a player who would be steadily climbing at a 53% win rate is hard stuck in gold with a 50% win rate just because of Smurfs. Now, that's not to say that the reason why you're not improving and not going up in rank is only because of Smurfs or is primarily because of Smurfs. Because I'll tell you, if you're a gold 4 player, there's about 1 million things that you could instantly improve on, really fast, that would make up for a 3% win differential. There's a lot of things you can improve on, like we talked about here. And so if you focus on those things, you will still improve faster than the other gold 4 players at your rank, and you'll still climb and get to where you want to go. But that doesn't mean smurfing is not a gigantic problem. So I just wanted to recognize that this situation here where it took me 2,400 games to go from bronze to diamond is not the same situation as today. It is possible that today I would have, if I was starting over as a new player versus all these Smurf accounts and stuff like that, it is possible I would have a harder time. It is very possible. Now, people hate this argument, but it is true, though, because I want to say it. It's very important. It is also true that playing against Smurfs does make you a better player. And that doesn't justify it existing in the proportion that it does in League right now. It really doesn't. But in the long run, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose any individual ranked game currently. What matters is, and we may have talked about this in this one too, or not, I forget. If you lose a game, right, you may think that that's like detrimental to your rank or something like that. But it actually has no impact on where your rank is going to be in the long run. Because when you lose a game, your future games get easier. And when you win a game that you shouldn't have won or whatever, or you gain a free win, like from AFKs and stuff like that. So let's go back to the AFK example. Let's say that you have AFKs and more AFKs happen on the other team than on your team. So you benefit from that. So you get some extra wins. What that also means is that your MMR goes up higher than you're capable of playing at, and the games get harder. And then you actually start to lose more games than you would normally win because your MMR went up from that free win from that AFK. So getting a free win because somebody AFK'd on the other team that's not really reflective of your skill level as a player doesn't actually change what rank you're going to peak at in the long run at all. In the same way, even if you were to like troll an into game or something like that, that wouldn't affect what your capability is as a player in the average in the long run anyways. Now in the short term, in your next 10 games, your rank's probably going to be a little bit lower because you lost or won that game. Because you haven't played enough games that you won one because your MMR was better. But let's say that over your next 100 games, you're very likely to win an extra game that you wouldn't have won otherwise if you lost because someone on your team AFK'd, because over your next 100 games, you're going to be playing every single one of your next 100 games at a lower MMR by 20 or whatever than you would have. And so one of those next 100 games, you're like basically guaranteed to win because your skill level is above that and you're playing at a much lower rank. So in the long run, stuff like that won't affect your rank. All that matters is what is your skill level capable of winning 50% of your games, at what rank are you able to do that? And playing against more Smurfs actually does mean that if you're learning from them, and maybe that can be difficult if you're just getting steamrolled, but if you're able to learn from them a little bit by having the opportunity to have higher ranked players in your games than against you, there is an argument to be made, and it is real and it is a factor, that if you can learn from playing against those players, your ultimate skill level will increase by having even lost to a much better player, as long as you take something away from the mistakes that you made versus them, because it tests you at a higher level than the players you're used to playing against. So if you learn something from that and then go and play against the easier players that you're playing against, you should, if you're improving, win more against players of your own skill, if that makes sense. So as long as you can take something away from the challenge, you won't be worse off for it. So for example, when we go back to it took me 2,428 games to go from bronze to diamond, if I had been learning against a bunch of higher skilled players during that time, even if it meant I lost more games in the short term, it might balance itself out if in the long run I'm able to get better as a player because of those games. So it's really important that you take those games in stride and learn from them rather than tilting. Although, right, that's hard to do because it shouldn't really be allowed, and it's obviously very unfair. And yeah, that's a big swing in win differential that I think Riot should try to do something about. But, just to keep that in mind. So let's see, where were we here? Okay, so for the beginning part of the climb, I hate to flashbang everyone again. I don't, we'll figure this out. People were talking about dark mode for Excel. I wasn't planning on showing this again. But I think dark mode for Excel looks terrible. Or for Google Docs in this case. I could try to put it into dark mode right now, and I'm pretty sure it looks terrible. Let me see if I have, let me see. I don't even know. That's not right. Maybe I need an extension. It's funny to do this during the middle of a video. Anyways, it looks absolutely terrible. Let's see, I keep calling it docs. It's what's it called? Docs is the Word document version of it. Sheets. There are add-ons and themes. I tried some, they're not good. Yeah, I've tried these, they're terrible. Let me just do this real quick. Show you how bad this is. Maybe someone will give me a good suggestion once I show how awful this is. What did it not do anything? Come on. Okay, here we go. It didn't do anything. Oh. This one doesn't even do anything. Wonderful. Here we go. Yeah, look at how awful this looks. Holy moly. Anyways, jeez, it's pretty illegible to me, but yeah. So the issue here basically is that you have these multiple factors at play, and the 2,428 games from bronze to diamond would be faster if you were focused on the things that I was talking about, but would be slower because of Smurfs, and would be slower because of Smurfs, but not if you're learning from them as frequently as you could. And then I think that the Diamond to Masters number could also be faster for most players if you don't have the server randomly move on you and you're playing from, unlocked camera from the beginning. I think that could help speed up this whole process. And then the Masters to Challenger thing, there's one thing I wanted to point out about that one too, which is that the climb in Masters to Challenger, which I've talked about before, was really weird over the last, and I'll pull up my op.gg to talk about this. The last couple of splits were really weird because they did the thing with multiple splits per year. So this started in 2023, split 1. And if we go back, I first hit Masters in 2021. And then I was Masters in 2022, but at the end of the season, I collapsed, ended in D2. And so then we get into the splits. And I was like a low Masters player for season 23. So I was kind of stuck between 2021 and 2023 in low Masters. And then I really improved between 2023 and 2024 to get to consistently around 400 LP, which is like a borderline GM, depending on the time of the year. But one of the things that happened here is during 2024, I was improving even more, probably up to the point where I was even at least consistently GM. But it's kind of hard to see because I kept ending at 400 LP. And a lot of the reason for that is because they did 3 splits that year. And so even though I was positive 20 ranked games, I'm trying to see if they show where the totals are. This is the first split where they added up the totals automatically. But I've added these up before manually. And for all 3 splits in 2024, I was like positive 20 ranked games each split. So I was like positive 60 games or something like that. And yet I was still ending at 400 LP every single split. So I personally believe that I was able to hit Challenger before the start of this year, back in 2024, if it wasn't for the fact that during 2024 I was getting reset 3 times. I think that it took so many games just to get back to 400 LP that it was preventing me from being able to hit Challenger, and I would have gotten there faster. So I will also say that on this 5,208 games from Masters to Challenger, now we're blocking that this would have been faster had there not been like 5 or 6 split resets in the 2 years I was working on getting from Masters to Challenger. I believe I would have been capable of hitting that faster. But even with those things all taken into account, the ratio probably wouldn't change a lot. In other words, it was really fast comparatively to go from bronze to diamond as it was to go from diamond to Masters. And it was really fast to go, or it was much slower, to go from Masters to Challenger, even if I potentially would have hit it a little bit earlier. Because even if I hit Challenger 2,000 games earlier, it's still the same number of games to go from Masters to Challenger as from like Diamond to Masters. And even if I had gotten, from Diamond to Masters a little bit faster because the server didn't move on me and stuff like that, then that would just, again, make the Masters to Challenger climb take even longer in comparison. And nothing would have made it as fast as how few games it took me to go from bronze to diamond. So I think it still proves that general consensus that going from bronze to diamond is significantly easier than even just going from Masters or from diamond to Masters for the first time. And I think going from Masters to Challenger is equally difficult, or like even more difficult as well, as going from Diamond to Masters. So, I guess that's the gist of it. That's how I would go about changing my rank journey. I guess I was going to talk a little bit about the queue times and stuff like that. I mean, just really briefly, I basically spent the queue time and dodging video talking about how, I don't want autofills to become more prevalent, and how I don't think that even if it means longer queue times, I would trade longer queue times for less autofills, because I understand that they're connected in a way that for whatever reason a lot of people aren't understanding even now. But I didn't really comment much on dodging itself. And I guess it's because I'm torn. Obviously, the majority of people seem like they want dodging removed. It wastes everybody's time, slows things way down, and it sucks. But as a player who uses dodging, I kind of like the ability to dodge when my main champion is banned, and I kind of like being able to dodge when someone's trolling. And we've got a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, because people are saying people will troll in champion select less. They'll never lock in Ghost Cleanse Nunu or whatever if they know that they can't dodge the game. And maybe that's true, but it's really hard to say 100% whether that's the case or not. Probably some people will still troll champion select. It's just going to be less frequent. And then the question is, because people seem to not understand this either, you can't remove dodging, right? Someone's PC can always turn off for legitimate reasons and things like that. What they're talking about when they say like remove dodging is making the penalty so harsh that you would never do it intentionally, right? So for example, making a dodge basically count as a loss, or maybe you lose MMR for dodging as well, or something like that. And that I would be okay with, but I'm not happy about it, right? Like for me personally, I don't like it. I think that, it's a tough question, because you run into all these little things. Maybe people would troll champion select less. Maybe you wouldn't be able to dodge a game where people are trolling. Maybe one tricks would have a harder time climbing, which sucks a little bit for me personally as someone who mostly plays Braum. But maybe that would be a good thing, because maybe one tricks don't deserve to be as high up on the ladder as they're capable of getting now. And, to some extent, I'm trying to work on not being a one trick right now and trying to look at teams and stuff like that. And, displaying a bunch of different champions played on my op.gg and stuff like that. So maybe if I'm forced to do that a little bit more, that could be better for my development as a player. Or people, if I'm able to get high rank anyways and people feel like less one tricks are capable of doing that, maybe that would look good for me. I don't know, but whatever the case is, there's a lot of little issues you run into like that. So people have talked about like it should be like a 24-hour lockout. Well, what happens if like your computer legitimately crashes? You really gonna not let that person play for the whole rest of the day? What are you going to do? It's not like you can prevent someone from closing the game, because someone's PC can turn off and there has to be some response to that from Riot. So I think people misunderstand so many things about this. They misunderstand that you can't shorten queue times without, increasing the rate of autofills in games. Because if you're going to make a match come together faster, you have to have either a wider range of ranks or you have to have more autofill players. And you can't, remove dodging from the game entirely. It's impossible. It's just a question of what is going to happen as a result. So, I think we could definitely get rid of dodging, but I don't know whether I personally support it or not. I think it would have a lot of positives and benefits, and it's kind of hard to say. But obviously the majority of people seem like they want dodging gone. And then as far as the queue times go, I've already kind of answered that question. And there were people bringing up that like Viper, who's the rank 1 player, has like a 30 to 50 minute queue time. I think that that's like not representative of what the average GM or challenger player is dealing with. We're also talking about like, and I didn't do a good job of talking about this in the video, but we're talking about queue time of actual queue time, actual time spent in queue versus like the estimated wait time. I talked a lot about the estimated wait time. Obviously, when you have people dodging, then you're going to get multiple queues, and so that's going to go a lot longer. Regardless of that happening, though, I think that a 10-minute queue time for GM and Challenger is totally fine. Maybe even a 15-minute queue time for GM and Challenger is fine. For Masters, it should be a little bit lower. So I don't really have any change in opinion on that. I think queue time should be longer and there should be less autofills. I think for the rank 1 player, you have to understand that like that account has no one above them that they can play with. And so of course they're going to experience really high wait times. Also depends on what time of day you're playing. Like I think I got into that a little bit. Viper tends to stream and play at like a weird window, like 3 a.m, the worst degenerate hours, like I talked about. Maybe he should play at peak hours when people are playing the game. So, but I don't think that the representative average GM or Challenger player is waiting that long. Maybe at the top of Challenger it's like that. I said in the video that I haven't been to high Challenger, so I don't know. Maybe if it's like that for like the top 100 players, not just rank 1, then that's a problem. No one's okay with 30 to 50-minute queues, right? We want queues to be, somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes for Challenger GM with less autofills. We want queues to be slightly lower for Masters, maybe 5 to 7 minutes with less autofills and stuff like that. And if they remove dodging too, then that's great. I gotta go. Good luck in solo queue. Have a wonderful day.